Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, a lot happening in the news. Here's one item that we noticed. Canada canceled democracy last night. And the remarkable thing is, no one in this country seemed to notice that it happened. There was no outcry from our political class as their friend Justin Trudeau declared martial law in response to an entirely peaceful protest from his country's working class. Our news media barely noted that it happened. Weirdest of all, the State Department, which exists these days to denounce such attackers of democracy as Hungary and Poland, didn't say a single word as democracy in Canada ended. That's pretty weird if you think about it. Canada is not some exotic faraway land with an alien culture and an unintelligible language. It's not Ukraine. Canada is our neighbor. It's our trading partner. Canada is our closest ally on earth. It's practically part of our country. Our vice president grew up in Canada. So did half of our comedians and actors and singers. Our border with Canada is the longest border in the world. It stretches more than 5,500 miles. So on every level, we are deeply intertwined with Canada, whether we notice it or not. What happens there matters here. If nothing else, it's a preview of what will likely happen in the United States. So with that in mind, you should know that Justin Trudeau is no longer the Prime Minister of Canada. Justin Trudeau is Canada's maximum leader. It's strongman, it's caudillo, it's potentate. Justin Trudeau is the dictator of Canada. If you think that's an overstatement, try to think of another way to describe what Justin Trudeau is now doing. For the first time in Canada's history, Trudeau has invoked what's known as the Emergencies Act, though the protests he is facing hardly qualify as an emergency. But suddenly, Justin Trudeau has the power to crush all political opposition to his rule, and that's exactly what he's doing. Trudeau has ended free speech in Canada. He's banned free assembly. Trudeau's government has shut down political rallies and arrested his political critics without probable cause. Trudeau has instituted internal passports that restrict travel within Canada to the politically obedient. Canadians are no longer allowed to leave their own country unless they obey Justin Trudeau. And if they don't obey, they could be bankrupted and destroyed. He now has the power to do that. Trudeau has claimed the power to freeze the financial assets of any Canadian who resists him. No court order is required to do this. He just decides. Justin Trudeau can even dictate what you do for a living and how you do it. Today, Trudeau threatened to arrest tow truck drivers who refused to tow the trucks of protesters. Is this really about stopping the spread of coronavirus? No one in Canada is even pretending that it is anymore. Trudeau himself didn't mention the risk of COVID a single time yesterday. He's not worried about unvaccinated truckers spreading a virus. Trudeau was worried about Canadians resisting his rule. And that's why Trudeau's government announced yesterday they plan to regulate cryptocurrency forever. Watch.
We are broadening the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use. These changes cover all forms of transactions, including digital assets, such as cryptocurrencies. The illegal blockades have highlighted the fact that crowdfunding platforms and some of the payment service providers they use are not fully captured under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act.
Oh, the Terrorist Financing Act. So that was a law passed to defeat al-Qaeda. Now it's being used to stop law-abiding Canadians, middle-class people, students, truck drivers, from protecting their earnings from the total mismanagement of Canada's central bank. Justin Trudeau has wrecked the Canadian economy, but thanks to the Terrorist Financing Act, there is no escape from the consequences. Canadians are going to have to live with the consequences of Justin Trudeau's fiscal recklessness, whether they want to or not. Otherwise, they're terrorists. It shouldn't surprise you that Trudeau's first move in the face of a trucker protest was to clamp down on cryptocurrency. Democrats will try this in this country, guaranteed. They'll tell us Bitcoin is a Russian plot. CNN will dutifully back them up. Watch it happen. But at the same time, you've got to wonder, since we're speaking of terrorism, what happened to the actual terrorists? Those do exist. How is Justin Trudeau treating them? Well, let's see. A few years ago, Justin Trudeau gave more than $10 million in taxpayer money in a settlement to a self-described al-Qaeda soldier called Omar Khadr. Khadr murdered a U.S. Army sergeant. Now, murdering a U.S. Army sergeant is bad, but it's not as bad as criticizing Justin Trudeau. So Trudeau did not freeze Khadr's bank account. Instead, he just made him rich and moved on. When anti-Christian arsonists burned more than 50 Catholic churches across Canada, Justin Trudeau did not declare an emergency. Instead, he issued a statement sympathizing with them. Quote, "It is fully understandable," Trudeau said, "given the shameful history we're all becoming more aware of." You're beginning to see how this works? In a dictatorship, the only real crime is opposing the regime. So how did all of this happen so quickly in a country as nice and moderate as Canada? Well, it happened the way that it always happened. It happened with maximum aggression and limited popular support. Justin Trudeau won re-election last year with less than a third of the national vote. In fact, he finished the election behind his main competitor, the Conservative Party. Thanks to quirks in the parliamentary system, Trudeau took power anyway, and he immediately began to crack down on anyone who opposed him.